Self-publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is The Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. Yes, it is The Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson. How was your week off, James?
My week off. Did I have a week off?
Well, you weren't on the podcast, were you? It was just me.
Yes, my week off. Yeah, it didn't really feel like a week off, but I know what you're saying. Yeah, when I was very impressed with your monologue, you were like, Jay Leno back in the day.
One take, that's what they call it.
One take, Dawson.
Yeah.
It was good, yeah. I listened to the whole thing and, good discussion with yourself.
Yeah, I found I agreed with almost everything I said. It's great.
Yeah. It was nice. I think it's good. Light and shade for the podcast. Mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
This is like a traditional episode, though. It's very traditional, actually, because our guest is one of our very first guests on the podcast.
That's right. Yes, Joanna Penn.
Joanna Penn might have been first or second.
Not the first, because who was that?
Is it Pat?
No, it wasn't Pat Flynn. It was, I can't remember now. It was about 6 years ago, so
a long time
I
ago.
don't remember things.
We went through this recently in the 400th. Listen to the 400th episode. Exactly. In the history of the podcast.
Yes, I saw Joanna. I was in Paris on Thursday and Friday for the first an indie conference, the first one in France, at least I'm aware of, with Jupiter Phaeton, is a pen name. Caroline.
Yes, I know her. Yeah. Well, we interviewed her.
We did. Yeah, so really, a couple of 150 to 200 people there. Well attended, good. So Amazon was supporting it, so there's some fairly senior Amazonians from the French market, which was very nice to meet them. And then Joe was on. Actually, I walked. I got there, flew in, decided I had an hour in the hotel, and I thought I'm going to go to the drinks, and it was about 5 miles away, so I thought I'll walk.
Wow.
So I walked 5 miles along the river, which was very nice.
Nice. That's a nice walk.
Although really. Typical kind of Englishman abroad, I was on the path, and they're not very well signposted that they're paths and also cycle lanes. And I was kind of walking along quite happily, and someone walloped me in the back. I think he just put his
Sacre bleu!
Something like that. I think he put his hand out and kind of walloped me, which was fine. I was in the wrong space. He could have stopped, I suppose. But anyway, that was fine. I walked there, nice walk along the river, and had drinks, and then the following day had a good session. Joe talked about AI, which is very interesting. Really, lots of things I didn't know that she's using. It's really, fast moving, as we've mentioned before. And then I, because I'm a lazy git, didn't actually prepare anything. I just I was interviewed, which obviously is quite a lot easier than doing a presentation. But just chatted about things I've learned over the last 10 years in English. So thank you to everyone who persevered. I think most of them spoke English because they're not lazy like us. Then I flew back. And
so was the conference in English?
No, mostly in French, I think. But obviously Joe was speaking in English. I spoke in English. Some questions there was a couple of people who translated questions and things. So I think not everyone spoke English, but probably most of them did. And I think the transcripts will be translated into French. So it was good. So it's definitely one, if you're in France and obviously I know now we have lots of French listeners because I was buttonholed by a couple of them. Actually, two people said that they're very grateful and pleased to meet me because they'd taken the course and were full-time writers in French, which was
wow,
obviously always a pleasure to meet people who are able to do that. So it's definitely. I think she's going to do it next year, so I would recommend it. It's if you can't get over to the UK for our conference, which we'll mention in a moment, then I would definitely recommend looking at the Paris conference because it was really a great venue, very well put on, and who doesn't like Paris? It was about 25 degrees. It was really warm.
Yeah, nice.
So Joe and I had lunch on the boulevard for a couple of hours, which was really nice to catch up with her. So generally really nice couple of days away, and I would recommend it if you're thinking about your conferences for next year.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, maybe I'll go. It's I went to Paris, as I mentioned on the podcast, did a bit of book research.
Yes.
Earlier in this year. It is. It's a lovely city, Paris. I hadn't been there for years actually. But it reminded me that it's not a compact city centre. I went for a run in the morning, and I ran from my hotel at the Louvre to the Eiffel Tower and back, and it was probably 4.5-5 miles a loop.
Yeah.
And that's London's much more compact than that. So. Anyway, good. Well, that's excellent, and well done to Jupiter and the team there. We should also say that Jo is coming up in a moment, so you can hear from her yourself. She's got a fantastic and very interesting new book. It's a very interesting conversation. I'll leave it at that. You're going to have that pleasure in a few moments. But we have something special to tell you, which is we are releasing tickets for our own conference, which is in the much more compact, equally nice London next June, the 25th and 26th. That's Tuesday and Wednesday of that week, the 25th, 26th of June, 2024. There's a wait list, which we've told you about, but that will be converted to a ticket page at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. That's Tuesday the 17th. I think that's the 17th. Can you just double check that? Who's got a calendar nearby?
Tuesday the 17th. Yes, it is. Correct.
So 4 p.m. in the UK is 8 a.m. if you're in Los Angeles, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 11 a.m. if you're in New York.
That's almost certainly wrong, by the way. But
I did double check that earlier. It is the case.
All right.
And those tickets will go on sale. As before, we are doing an early bird offer for the first month or so. So if you sign up early bird for £175, you get full access to both days and the party, which is the cost for the conference without the party, full price. And that will go up to £199 after 30 days. So you get 30 days to get your early bird tickets in. And that's a little bit shorter than we did last year because we did it to the end of the year, and then from the 1st of January it was the full price. But honestly, we don't want to have to do logging in and doing a load of stuff on New Year's Day. So for that reason, it's going to be until the 7th, until mid-November, so the 17th of November. We expect the tickets to go fast. We probably won't sell out during the early bird period, but you never know. We have a limited number of seats. We only sell 816 of the seats in the hall. We have to reserve some for our guests after that. So looking forward to it. Back at the South Bank Centre after some prevarication, but I think it's the right decision, at least for this year, and looking forward to hopefully a nice sunny week in June. So where do you go to buy your tickets? It's the same URL that we gave out for the waitlist. It will just be switched over next Tuesday. So at the moment, it will show you a wait list, but it will be the same place to go. It's selfpublishingformula.com/SPS live, all one word. And looking forward to that. Mark.
Yes, James. What?
We have a couple of Patreon.
Oh yes, we do.
Supporters to mention.
Hang on. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm just trying to find the correct window. Here we go. So yes, we've got two new patrons. Patron supporters, so thank you very much to Nikki Gerlane and Trudy Nixon. Don't know where either of you are from, but doesn't matter. We're very grateful for your support, and it does help us to put the show together because it isn't cheap to do this, and we could cut things like transcripts and stuff, but we don't really want to do that because we know people like to read the transcripts along rather than just listen to the podcast sometimes. So we will continue to do that as long as we can, and people helping us like Nikki and Trudy are very kind, and we're very, very grateful. So thank you to both of you.
After your solo effort last week, it was suggested that maybe they replace me with AI.
And then I think Dan Wood said that they don't have enough computing power for the wit and charm, which
but then I suggested maybe you already have.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yes, very good.
Would you like me to cut myself?
No,
to prove that
let's not.
Are you sure?
Oh dear, don't look at your watch
on Ex Machina,
or or Blade Runner. You could be
Blade. Yes, I'm a replicant.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. Yes. Carry on.
Good. Decker. Okay. Well, should we get on to the interview? So it's Jo Penn, one of our favourite friends from the self-publishing community. We've both spent some time with Jo in person this year as well at your 50th in Salisbury and you in Paris, and always a breath of energy when you speak to Jo. So this is her new book, which is a very revealing book about you and me and her. So basically, if you follow this, you will find out more about yourself, and it's very typical Jo, I think, to really dig into I don't want to sound too pretentious about this, but kind of the essence of humanity, of what we are, and using that to make our books better, which is, as you'll hear develop in the interview, all the more important now we can be up against AI written books, is to use our own humanity, our own emotion in our book. So the book is called Writing the Shadow, Turn Your Inner Darkness into Words. There is a Kickstarter live now. You get the URL during the interview. Here is Jo Penn.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Joanna Penn, welcome back to the Self-Publishing Show. Do you know, I interview a lot of people, and sometimes I get 3-4 people who I don't really know who they are, and it's great learning all about them. But I've just interviewed Dave Chesson, and I'm now interviewing you in the space of one afternoon. And you are both friends of the show. I almost said very old friends of the show, but that's not a polite thing to say to anybody, is it?
I think that's fine. We've both got our grey hair going on now. But no, it's great to be back on the show. And I was thrilled to hear in your episode 400 quiz when I was one of the first few guests, and Mark guessed it correctly. So that's good to know.
He did. You're an early adopter of the Self-Publishing Show. It's great to have you back here. And we had a little get together in the summer, didn't we, to mark Mark's 50th in an evening that was marked by alcohol and cold weather. It was so cold. Indeed. And
I don't remember being cold, but then I turned up several hours before you and managed to drink far more gin. And then I do remember thinking later, I think I'd had a few gins by the time I spoke to James. So I think we got a nice picture. So maybe we can put it in the show notes.
I didn't. You look perfectly sober. But then that's a trick, isn't it? Good. Okay, look, let's talk about the one thing you spoke to me about that evening, and that's the reason we're chatting today, is this book. You've written a lot of books. You've written a lot of your fiction. You've written non-fiction. But this is the book. You gave me the impression, the kind of magnum opus. This is the one that's been going on in the background for some years. So you better tell us about it.
Yes. So the book is Writing the Shadow, and it's Turn Your Inner Darkness into Words. And as you mentioned, this is one of those books of my heart. And I guess coming back to middle age and grey hairs, there are some books that we always want to write, but we put off because we don't feel that we're ready. And after I wrote Pilgrimage earlier this year, which was kind of my first memoir, it really unblocked a lot of things for me. And I realised that I could be much more open and honest in my non-fiction about personal things, and that people actually found that to be something that touched them. So Writing the Shadow, it's based on the principle of Carl Jung's shadow. So the side of the personality that is unconscious, which means it's quite difficult to address, but that we repress, or that we've basically been told is not appropriate. And that doesn't mean it's evil or bad. Like the idea of the shadow, it's not just darkness, it's not death, it's not evil. It's things that we're told are not appropriate. And just to sort of start us off with one of my examples, when I was a kid, and as writers, it's often stuff when we're young people, when we have ideas about things, and then we're told by someone or society, a parent, a teacher, a friend, a sibling, some other things where we're like, that's not appropriate. So back in my school, I was writing out a nightmare in an English class, and my teacher said, you can't write things like that. You're not allowed to write things like that. It's not appropriate. And this was in a literary English class. You can imagine the type in a school. And from that moment, I stopped writing anything creative. And it took, I think it was something like 23 years until I wrote my first novel. And I share a lot of these stories in the book. But essentially, the whole idea of the book, Writing the Shadow, is we need to take the things that we have repressed and turn them into the basis of our creative work, which will make it more resonant for other humans. And in an age of AI, I know you've started talking about AI, we need to double down on being human. We need to show our flaws, and we can also help heal ourselves and other people. So I guess it's a self-help book for writers, but it is also, I guess, a psychology book, slightly memoir book. But yeah, I guess that's a sort of big idea.
Okay, I want to try and understand the concept a little bit better. So, I mean, when you first started describing it, it made it sound like it could be almost like a horror story, like the alter ego, the evil twin, the dark secret that someone has. And I guess it could be that shadow, but it can also be something that could be positive in your life, just that you're not acknowledging. Is that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a really classic one that I think you will possibly identify with too, which is, and you can identify these things, there's whole lots of ways you can identify them, but one of them is when you're triggered. So when you react in a way to something that other people would just not be that bothered about. So if I said to you, James, you're really lazy. You're a lazy man. I mean, I know how hard you work, right? Lazy is a trigger word for me. If someone calls me, did you feel like that? Did you feel like...
I think I'm lazy.
You do think you're lazy? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so that's not a trigger for you.
However much I work, however hard I work, if I go to the cinema, I cannot relax in the cinema because I think I should be working. So there is a part of me that has that kind of, you're not working hard enough.
Yeah,
so,
I do think that's
triggering.
part of it. Yeah, so it is triggering. So for me, this is a big one. And a lot of writers have said to me that they identify with this, which is, so if it's like, okay, but the good thing of this is it drives our business. It drives why we write, because we like our work, we love our work. And yet the shadow side, so what you've got to think is the kind of continuum. If you essentially don't accept that side, you can end up burning out, and burnout is a huge issue in the writer community. You can judge other people, so your judgments about others also come up. So I definitely feel guilty about, like, if I'm out somewhere and I see people having fun, I sometimes feel like, why are you doing that? You're being lazy, having fun. You should be working. And even saying it out loud, it seems ridiculous, but that's what drives me to overwork. And so that's a shadow aspect that I need to acknowledge. And like the whole point of realizing these things is to, we're not banishing that side of ourselves. What we want to do is stop it getting out of control. So we mentioned drinking before. There's this idea of, if your shadow gets out of control, it will act out in the world. If you don't deal with it, it will come out in some way. You can only force it down for so long, like a balloon, underwater. If you keep trying to deny it exists, at some point it's going to pop out. And for me, back when I really hated my job, I used to implement accounts payable in companies, and I was so miserable. But I just didn't know how to deal with it. I just wasn't acknowledging it. I liked the money. I was partying very, very hard, basically all the time. And I spent a lot of time feeling guilty for my behavior. And that was my shadow side acting out. And it was only when I could say, okay, do you know what? I really hate my job. I need to deal with it. That's when I was able to address the root cause of my behavior and deal with that in a more healthy way. So again, we're not trying to get rid of things. What we're trying to do is incorporate them into our lives and our writing in order to move forward, healing ourselves, healing other people, but also making our writing a lot richer.
Okay. So the first thing we need to do, I guess, is identify our shadow.
Well, don't think of it as one thing. So it can be lots of different things. Another way to identify it. So this is what a question I had for you. So it's quite hard. Think of it as something out the corner of your eye that sometimes you think, maybe that's an issue for me. So the triggering is one way. If you're triggered by words or situations that other people think are normal, that there may be something under there. Another thing is to really look at the characters in your books, particularly the books of your heart. And this is what I wanted to ask you, because everyone listening will probably know that you have family background in aviation and military, and then a personal background in that. But your books, so what I was going to ask you, I think the question is, what are the flaws and the wounds of your characters that run across multiple books? So you've got 2 novels and a novella, I think, now.
Yeah.
So can you identify, because our character flaws and our character wounds, especially of the books of our heart, are often the ones that we might have. So, and I identified one in yours. So I wondered if you could think of anything, like what is the character flaws of is it Red Brunson and Chris Milford? Yeah.
Well, I think they might be different, the two of them. The character flaws, I don't know if I'm a good enough writer to have brought out what I wanted to put in there as the character flaws, but the character flaw is kind of male repression, emotional male repression. That was the theme, certainly of book 1, and all the men in my books have an underlying sort of foundational issue. Started off as male repression. I think with Red Brunson, there's a bit more of lack of confidence with him and trying to prove himself in that environment. Although, funnily enough, saying this out loud, I do think I went a bit too far in that book with that. But it's male oppression. That is my, and funnily, I didn't start off to doing that, but it was when I spoke to my first development editor. She was the one who pointed out it was there and brought it out. And then she asked me to write a kind of page about why I'd written the book. What was the question? The question was, this was Jenny Nash asked me to this. The question was, why do you need to tell this story? And I blubbed my heart out writing out this page. It was a really emotional thing for me to do. But that was the key to me writing the book. So I knew at that point onwards that it was about being uncomfortable exposing your emotions, being uncomfortable saying I love you, being told I love you, all the things that happen to a young middle-class male brought up by a father who was in the armed forces, whose father was served in the First World War, and that I was the product of that. So I had thought about this, and I guess that was my shadow. I don't know if that's what you saw in it or not.
That is just brilliant. And have you shared the letter you wrote or the document you wrote? Have you shared that?
Not with anyone else but Jenny and me, yeah.
I would love for you at some point, and I'm sure listeners would too, when you have enough distance from this whole thing. And this is another thing. It's much easier to see our issues and our shadow side in our early books while we still are raw. So you were still a raw writer. And I see the same in my book, Stone of Fire. There was so many things where I was like, oh my goodness, I just didn't see that at the time. I would love to sort of challenge you in 5 years time that you would maybe release an edition of that book with that essay at the back.
Wow.
Or something like that, or you would read it, because that is exactly right. And people listening, this is so powerful that you did that. And your editor, that's a very good editor, by the way.
Yes.
But okay, so let's go back to it. So this emotional male repression or a fear of sharing emotion, we can often find our shadow in what we're afraid of or what we're ashamed of, what we feel guilty about. And obviously, it's very difficult to talk about this in public to all the people this is going out to, because mostly we're not going to say aloud what those things are. But it's brilliant that you've done that. So basically the fear of sharing emotion, that's what you addressed.
Yeah.
And what you did there, and this is kind of the whole premise of the whole book, is if you can do that, if you can address what was in your shadow and you bring it out into the open, you're able to talk about this. It's no longer in your shadow. So now you've addressed that in your life, you can move forward. So have you felt that you have been able to express emotion better since you wrote that book?
Yeah, I didn't know it was a problem for me. Even though looking back, I know when I was about 19, 20, 21, I had a girlfriend for 4 years and she told me about this. And she said to me, I don't want you to end up like your dad. And I was shocked by that comment. So that's why the only reason I remember it, because I felt the sense of injustice. What does she mean? What's wrong with my dad? And it took me decades to work out what she meant, that I didn't really engage in argument. I didn't want to have the argument with her about stuff. So I just wasn't comfortable at all with any of that stuff. I think probably writing that book, going through that process was the biggest single step forward for me. It's been a slow, I hate to use the J word, but it's been a slow journey out of that period to where I am now, which is a much better. I'm still there, Joe, with me. I still fight it a bit, but it's. I think the book process was a bit like a period of therapy for me. That there was a bit of a breakthrough.
That's brilliant. You just said that's the whole premise of the book, basically, right. Is that we can, and I guess the whole point is finding the gold in the shadow. And the gold in the shadow can be that you feel healed around that process, or you've at least started the process of learning how to be a better person, which we're all about self-development, right? Sometimes that can be something that actually involves other people. And this obviously has made your relationships better because now you're able to talk in a different way. But it can also be, since this is a business podcast and a creative podcast, the gold can be how people relate to your book. So the example I like to give is Colleen Hoover. Mm-hmm. So obviously author of The World at the moment, in original indie superstar. And Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us. I don't know if you've read any of
I haven't, no. I read a few of those big sellers at the time, but mainly Lucy's, to see what was going on, but I haven't read a coho. Although I do know what the premises of it starts with.
Yeah, they're
the first
very
one
dark.
Ends With Us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're very dark, and It Ends With Us is about her parents' relationship. It's a novel, But readers love it. Readers absolutely love it. And I feel like we've been scared to put enough of ourselves in our books. And the whole point is that the way we're moving forward, and I'm pro AI, absolutely pro AI, but what I can see with AI is that it's pretty much, it can write the average book. It's going to be able to write the average book very quickly. So the average book is not good enough. You can't write a functionally average book. And I mean, that's pretty good. Most of us don't write a functionally average book for a while. We have to learn the skills. But what we need to do in terms of turning our shadow into gold is connecting with other humans. Now, in Writing the Shadow, I talk about some of my issues, for example, my divorce from my first husband. I'm happily married for the second time.
News to your second husband that there's another one.
Yeah. I talk about my sort of creative journey and how I was almost, I guess, blocked for many decades over what people told me I could and couldn't do. So for some people listening, I was talking to someone earlier who said, yeah, I've got all these books, but I haven't ever published any. And the reasons she was talking about around why she hasn't published were all about fear of judgment, fear of not getting it right. That an agent wouldn't like it, that a publisher wouldn't like it, that the readers wouldn't like it. And it all kind of stemmed from originally being told that what she was writing wasn't the right thing, which I think many of us have heard. So, yeah, I think it's just an interesting process to make our books much more personal, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And it's a tough process.
Yeah. And that was Jenny's thing when she said she wanted the book to be great, not good. So that's why she asked me why I needed to write the book. And once she'd identified that, that's what she wanted me. She wanted that to be in the DNA of every sentence, every paragraph and every chapter in the book. And that was brilliant.
So that's a sort of thematic elements that we come back to. So one of mine is religion. I was a teenage convert into the evangelical church and later was very disillusioned with that, and spend my life sort of wrestling with religious knowledge and background and education and lack of actual religious faith, even though I consider myself spiritual. So, and I wrote about this in Pilgrimage and also in Writing the Shadow. So religion is a huge thing. There'll be people listening where religion is one of the biggest issues that they maybe have yet to deal with. Family is another one. My original story that I wrote stemmed from a nightmare about choosing between the two halves of my family. My parents divorced when I was little. So I had to choose between my mum and my brother being killed or my dad and my sister being killed. Like this is a nightmare of a 11-year-old.
Sophie's choice type, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And because I obviously felt that I had to choose. And in my fiction, I very much write about love of family, saving sisters in particular. And I write a lot about father-daughter. So there are these things that mean a lot to us that sometimes we hide. And exactly what you were talking about, which is we need to double down on that in order to connect human to human.
And in some ways, you kind of, from a writing point of view, you don't want it to be completely solved because that can take away. And we have this with bands, don't we? They write their best music when they're struggling and feeling the sense of injustice at the man, and everyone gets chosen record labels. And 5 years after 2 huge hit albums, they're struggling to write songs because they've got nothing to struggle for anymore.
You say that, but you know how it is. It's life is an onion or whatever it is that you have to.
There's always some other struggles. Yeah,
you have to peel off the layers and sort of circling back again. One of the things that I think I mentioned to you at the party, one of the things that the last few years I've been going through sort of menopause process, which is a far bigger upheaval than I expected. And in fact, I didn't even recognize that my symptoms were related to this because I didn't see myself as an older woman. And it was like I'd pushed the idea of aging into the shadow. I couldn't even recognize that I was older and therefore this might be the answer to the problem.
No, in denial.
And Yeah, and it's crazy. So I feel like midlife, and many people listening will either be in midlife or over midlife or approaching it. And it's something that I didn't expect to bring what it did. I guess the other thing I talk about is, well, finding the gold is sort of the gift after the pain. And this is not an easy process, but equally, once we go through one challenge, there's another one. That is the process of life. We're always learning new things. And also just coming back to the original metaphor of the book. So I don't know if you've heard of Plato's chariot. Do you know Plato's chariot? No?
Maybe. It rings a vague bell. I might recognise it on you.
Yeah, Plato is obviously ancient Greek philosopher. And the idea is there's a chariot with two horses. There's a dark horse and a white horse. And then the charioteer drives the chariot. Now, if the dark horse, which we can say is the shadow, and the white horse, which is your conscious self, if they're running together, then you're going to be flying along. You're going to, really do really well. But if one is stronger than the other, you could either head off a cliff with the dark horse, or like the white horse. I think of myself, Joanna Penn is quite a white horse personality. You stay within the lines, stay within acceptable things. But what that can do is just keep you within the lines. And that means you won't be able to create what you want to the most. And so in this process of sort of discovering this side of us, this shadow side, the things that we've pushed down, the things we've hidden from other people, they bring a richness to our work that allows these horses to kind of run in tandem. And I feel even just writing this book, and this is another sort of creative thing I find, is that with writing a particular book, it releases one block and then you're off. And then, of course, there's another one. But this, I say at the end of the book, I'm going to let my dark horse run. The projects that I have for the next 15 years of my career are completely different to the projects I've had for the last 15 years of my career.
Because of this process you've been through?
Writing this book is almost the culmination of understanding the creative path I've been on so far and looking forward to the next 15 years. So as this year, as we're recording this in 2023, this is my 15th year. I started the creative pen December 2008. So this is my 15th year, and I'm ready to kind of change angle in terms of what I want to do with my next 15 years. And whatever people are writing, so whatever book you're writing, listeners, it will bring new challenges for you and also a vision of the way forward. And I feel like until I wrote this book, I could not understand why I felt so hemmed in. Like I've been feeling hemmed in by the way the indie author business has become something that it wasn't. And now I'm ready to move onwards and through that into something new. So again, the idea is that by writing these stories that are really in your heart, you release something and can move into the next step.
Can you give us a hint of what these next projects are? Was this all secret?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, and it's more that I'm going to lean more into JF Penn. So JF Penn, as JF Penn, I've written lots of fiction, but I feel like this may be my last craft book. I mean, never say never. But Joanna Penn, this is my sort of, feels like a finale for Joanna Penn. I haven't actually said that out loud. So, but it feels like I will do other nonfiction, but as JF Penn. I'm also really shifted my business. Firstly, just coming back to AI, I love AI. So I'm using a lot more AI in my creative process, not necessarily the actual words, but a lot more in my creative process. I'm moving to publishing differently. So this book is Kickstarter and then Shopify, and sort of treating Amazon like any other platform, like Kobo, like Apple, like whatever. So shifting that way. So I feel like I've changed my creative process, my publishing process, and also my marketing process, in that I'm focusing much more on the true fans and stopping obsessing about the big sort of load of other people out there, assuming that I will attract those people over time. Obviously, I'm still using things like paid ads and stuff like that, but it's almost a change of focus as opposed to ditching everything. I mean, again, like at midlife, we have this, should I just ditch everything and start again?
Yeah.
But I decided not to do that.
So we're not going to do what Jerry Seinfeld did and had a funeral for Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, after he finished his last stand-up tour, although he's now, of course, back on stand-up. But he actually did have a funeral. I think it was a gag. But
yeah, exactly.
So
well,
Joanna
I'm not
Penn,
doing that.
no, Joanna Penn won't be laid to rest.
No, and I'll still be podcasting.
Yeah.
It's just that my focus. So, for example, one of my next projects I want to do is I want to do a photo book of Gothic cathedrals.
Okay.
To go along with the Gothic Cathedral Mystery Series, which I want to write, and a whole load of other things. So just doing things differently than the way I've been done before. And as I said, I feel like this book has released me from a lot of the expectations and things around stuff that I'd been holding in. And there's a lot of confessional in the book.
So that last line, that will be off-putting for some people listening to this, because, this dark side of us, this shadow, is a personal thing. I've come a long way to be able to share stuff like that. And I do think I'm still, in fact, I just spent a fantastic week with my close friends with a little retreat after Nink. And I did find myself, I was thinking of the way I interacted afterwards, thinking I'm very happy to share surface stuff. I overshare state of my life, finances, company. And I think that's deliberately to keep the deeper stuff not talked about. Because if you feel the silence with that stuff, no one's going to ask you, how do you feel about it? And I think I am still, that's still me. So it's quite still to this moment, nerve-wracking or uncomfortable is a better word, of the idea of sharing that. And if I was going to write a non-fiction book, people listen to this saying, well, I'm not going to put any of that stuff out into the world. But putting it into a fiction novel, we shouldn't be scared of that, because the average reader is simply going to enjoy the story and get something from their own life from it. They're not going to be thinking, oh, this person's got some dark history in their past, I think.
No, exactly. And I should say a couple of things around this. One, protect yourself. So look after yourself. If this is something deep and meaningful, like I said, it's been the last 3 years I've really been working through a lot of this stuff. You've obviously been working through your stuff for longer, and we can talk about it because of that. But if someone listening, if you need therapy, if you need help, please seek out help. This is not a therapy book. This is a writing book. Also protect other people. I think what we're not talking about is blaming others. So we're not writing a revenge thriller that is, or a revenge memoir, which can be something that people think is something to do.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. But I think the point of this shadow process in Jungian psychology is it's about you. It's not about that person. They have their own story. It's not about blame. It's about dealing with it and moving forward. So this is much more, self-helpy, based in psychology. I should say I have 2 degrees in psychology.
And we perhaps should underline that this can be, some people listening will be identifying serious trauma, which is in their background. This is not going to be, we're not really talking about that, although I suppose that could in a way. I'm not talking about that because that's not in my experience, but it could be something that comes up for sure. This is meant to be like a starting process. And as ever, there are lots of questions in the book that will help you think about things. But I think, we all love learning. We all love to understand more about ourselves and about our characters. But like you said, you can use this book entirely for your characters. Yes.
So if you're like, do you know what? I want to make characters deeper. I've got a whole section on deepening your characters and flaws and wounds and all of that kind of thing that you can use. You don't have to look at it at all as about yourself if you want to, but it will make it deeper. So one of the biggest criticisms of books and characters is like wooden characters, or they're not 3-dimensional enough. So you, instead of having, a hero or a heroine who is all perfect, you need to give them flaws. You need to give them backstory. You need to give them reasons to escape that, like you did with your book there. But yes, protecting yourself, protecting others. Of course, you can write under a pseudonym. A lot of people do write under a pseudonym to kind of get something out in a different way. You don't have to tell anyone you're writing anything. This can just be for your own journaling. We're not saying you actually have to publish any of this. And in fact, as part of the Kickstarter, I'm doing the shadow sessions, which are going to be online guided writing sessions. So if people want to come and investigate that kind of thing, then come along, bring some tissues.
Yeah. Well, that's, there are examples of people in our community who have used that trauma aspect of it. So I'm thinking of James Rassone, who talks very openly about this. I bumped into him and his wife Miranda in Nink. James served in the intelligence service in the Gulf War and has come away from it damaged. And he's open about that. He's come away with PTSD, and I've had conversations with him. He's struggled to get through. His writing, he was put onto as a therapy to deal with that. And it's been the most fantastic way of him keeping under control and understanding it. And part of me thinks, but don't you need a trained professional? Shouldn't be on a sofa? And maybe you do. But actually, all the trained professionals really going to do is to get you to self-examine and understand. So when you're putting into a book all these character flaws and how the deep sort of repression or whatever it is in that character, that is a brilliant way, and cheaper, frankly, than going through a series of and I think just as beneficial as going through professional services sometimes.
Yes, and obviously it depends on the individual. But for example, going back to my divorce, it was a surprise. You know, my husband just left, and so I had a lot of shadow aspects of that, like what's wrong with me? Am I too ugly, too bad a wife? You know, not attractive, and all the things that come up when these things happen. And I wrote. So I have journals and journals. You can kind of see behind me all my journals down there.
Oh, yeah.
I have a lot of journals I've been writing for a very long time. And I write journal after journal. And it's so repetitive. I found this with some of the sort of mental health depression things. It's very repetitive because it's the same thing. But that's how you feel. And yet when I read my journals of that time, I don't even recognize that person now, years later. And I've never even written any of that into a novel or anything. But even the act of putting it on the page took it out of my head and into, like, maybe dissolved it into the pages and did heal me. I didn't have any therapy around that. But that did kind of heal that. So yes, we can definitely put stuff into our books, like as Colleen Hoover, as you have, as I have, but we can also just keep that for ourselves. And it's definitely a process. But I guess another thing we could talk about is things like the shadow in publishing, because there are, again, if we think about the words fear and shame and guilt, things come up. So embarrassment or shame, people still ask me, don't you feel the stigma of self-publishing? And I remember 15 years ago, the word stigma being used. And when someone asks me that, I try and kind of be understanding, because that's not my stigma. I'm not feeling that, but they clearly are. They're feeling like there's something to be ashamed of. And the reason they're feeling that is because of the boundaries that society has put around publishing. And so there might be people listening who are embarrassed or ashamed and maybe haven't told people. The other thing that this comes up around, let's just be honest about it, is success. So there's a comparison between people who look like they're doing really well, people who are not doing well. There's a lot of dark side around ego and money in both the indie author community and the traditional publishing community. There's people who might launch a book, and I know a lot of traditionally published authors who, you know, the book comes out, no one even knows about it. They don't even know how to do marketing. And again, for indies, a book comes out, nothing happens. And so where we can also tap into where these things are is around, or for example, fear of judgment, fear of people knowing who you are, fear of nothing happening. There's a lot of fear and all these different feelings. So I want people to try and tap into that as well. Anger, ranting. If you find yourself ranting about something, then it's possible that there's some kind of trigger. So a good one for this show and what we've both heard is, oh, that person's doing well because they advertise. Yeah. And there's an issue around money that, oh, that person paid for success. That person's book is therefore lesser than a work that is not selling well, but is clearly worth more because that person hasn't paid for marketing. So there's a lot of shadow hang-ups around money and marketing and all that. You're nodding, so you know what I mean. What are some other things that you think might have come up in these areas? I
mean, that's interesting. The whole stigma still, which is a thing. And I think the only time, if they're young, I consider myself young, 56, but, you know, if they're kind of my age or younger, in their 40s and they're friends, I have no hesitation at all at not only putting them right on this subject, but evangelizing this. But when I meet older people, like my parents' generation, some are great and good, have done great things in their lives, and they're so excited that I'm published. And I can't bring myself to tell them I'm self-published because I think they will immediately be, oh, right, sorry, we thought you were published.
Properly published.
And I don't want to kind of ruin it for them. And so I've had that recently.
Wait, is that about them or is that about you? Is it fear of judgment of them seeing you as lesser? You are therefore lesser.
I'm a people pleaser, so I don't want to disappoint them. I think it's probably the primary. Where some people, I stand alongside some people who are the opposite of me, and they're like quite sort of punchy with it, saying, well, no, I'm self-published. They'll go all in on that, whereas I'll think, well, what do they want to hear? What does that person want? I'm a big person during conversation. What does this person want to hear? I'll say that.
That's interesting. So that to me signifies fear of judgment, because you want to say something that the other person will be happy with. So this is where we had kind of reframing things. So when you say I'm a people pleaser, I'm also a people pleaser. And I talk in the book actually about the various, you can name them, these personas that you have. And I call mine the needy one. The needy one wants you to like me. The needy one wants you to love me, you to like my books. The needy one is really there for Joanna Penn. It's like, please think I'm a good person and all of this. And that can be good, but it can also be quite damaging because we hide what we really think and we repress that. So I think that's quite an interesting thing. What are some of the other things that come up, do you think, for indies around fear of things? Or
I think there's also, you talked in our early interviews, you sort of taught me about defining success, which means different things to different people. So I think that is still an issue. And I think a lot of people don't really know what success looks like for them. I think that's an issue in this sense. So they might think it's financial return, but when they do become successful, it turns out it's not really that.
It's not that.
And you can probably go through your whole indie career not really knowing when you're going to consider yourself successful. Whereas other people probably easily successful and don't really care about that, but are really counting on those emails they get from somebody saying you changed my life. And I know that means huge amounts to some people. So I think understanding what success is an issue, is a kind of shadow issue that people don't really talk about or properly examine.
Or, as you say, so you might think your definition of success is money because society and your family and our culture says that it's money, but actually it's trying to examine what is below that. So I do have a whole chapter on money because it's such a big deal. There's so many triggers around money. For example, when I was at primary school, my mum was on benefits. We lived in the attic of someone's house. So we didn't even have our own place. And I had hand-me-down clothes. And I remember going to school and the girl said, "You're wearing my dress." And I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm not wearing your dress." And then somehow she got hold of it and looked in the back, and my mum hadn't taken her name tag out. And her name was in the dress. And I still remember her name. I won't say it out loud. But it's like that moment. And I can still feel like the shame of being poor. So I think, and I'm saying that out loud to people, I know there's nothing wrong with being poor. Yeah. But for me, the shame was I'm too poor. My mum can't afford a dress, let alone a room or whatever. And so that really drove me early on. I never wanted to feel that again. So I went to the opposite extreme. I earned really good money, but I didn't keep it. I spent it trying to look wealthier than I was. But then I had to, and that's one of the problems is we go from extreme to extreme, and where we need to look is that chariot. Think of the chariot. We need to go in the middle. So eventually I learned more about money and got to a more happy medium. But when we think about what drives some of these things, that's where we can find elements of shadow. So that memory of being ashamed of wearing hand-me-down clothes is what drives some of that behavior. So that's what I want people to think about. And that, hopefully, that everyone can see that in their mind. And that's the kind of detail that you can bring to your writing.
And when you talked just now about the person who said, well, it's because they're having success because they've got money, because they've advertised. I often think, and I think I'm right in this, that a lot of the time when someone says a comment like that, it's because they are always going to put barriers in front of their success. So they always find a reason, oh yeah, Mark Dawson's successful because he's got all that money. Well, hang on. Mark Dawson was doing the same job I was doing, spending most of his money on train journeys at the time he became rich writing. So it was the other way around. And there's other examples. They'll find a reason why so-and-so has been successful. Or they were there in the early days, so I'll never be able to do that. And I think, well, okay, if I'm being cynical about it before this interview, I would have just written them off saying you're never going to be successful because you're always going to find a reason why it's not going to happen to you. But I wonder if using your process, that person needs to examine, well, why do they come up with these things? Is it a lack of confidence? Is it they don't have self-belief? Is that their shadow? That if they can address that, that could genuinely help them if they start to sort of mantra or whatever, you come out with to say, I can be successful.
Yeah, and I don't actually have a sort of affirmation process. It's a lot more about writing myself. But yeah, I mean, I think in that situation, it can also be, for example, we're both British. My dad is a classic sort of paid up member of the Labour Party and has this sort of all Tories are bad, type of thing. And anything to do with money and business is therefore bad. Because
evil corporations.
Yeah, evil corporations. And I'm like, Dad, do you realise I run my own business? Yeah. I have a limited company.
I'm an entrepreneur,
yeah. I pay corporation tax. You can't just put everyone in the same thing. And so that sort of, I had to break out of some of my background of political thought in order to become successful in business. I had to re-educate myself in other things. And again, like I use in the book, I have a whole list of words like capitalism and billionaire. Like, how do you feel when you think about billionaires? Like, some people get really angry about things. Clearly not the billionaire romance lot, but
no.
And there'll be people who are both anti-money but also want money. So money is a really interesting area where we can look at both our personal experience, also our family experience, and also our culture. So like America is kind of crazy around the American dream of making the money, but it's also can be quite opposite and the other way. So we all have these polarized situations. But again, coming back to the person who resists that, is it because they're actually just anti-money in general? And it may be that the radical left-wing idea that you don't have to do any kind of business and still be successful. But yeah, even just the words we're saying are probably triggering a whole load of people here.
Well, communism in its like purest form, which is, might work on a small farm with 12
everyone
of you.
Should have the same. Yeah,
but
everyone
struggles
should
a
have
bit
the
as soon
same.
as it gets outside of that. I do think there's an injustice. Injustice is I was reminded about this the other day that when, my kids are grown. So my daughter turned 20, my oldest turned 20 a couple of days ago, and went through some old memories. But the things that they cling on to are the moments of injustice. So when they're 7 years old and they counted the number of presents that their brother got, that's the memory that's still there. So injustice burns really brightly in us. And I think that does drive some of that political stance that people take, that angry stance. There's a guy, I don't know if there's a right time or wrong time to mention him, but Russell Brand is a big comedian, being an actor in the States. So lots of sex allegations against him, very serious, all going through. Investigations are ongoing. So I'm not really about that. Although the most common thing people said when they all came out into the public was no one's hugely surprised that those allegations ended up on his doorstep. But I think he's gone down this injustice, angry route over the last few years. At some point, his Hollywood career was never going to work. He had very high expectations because he's been very successful, but he's never reached those limits. And he's become, if you've followed him over the last couple of years, he's gone down some very dark conspiratorial rabbit holes. And there's that burning sense of injustice driving him. And I think that drives a lot of people. And it can be a very negative thing, but is that something you can use?
Yeah, any of these things, again, I think when nuance is lost, that's when the problem occurs. So I was thinking of you with your military background and war. Obviously, we've got war with Ukraine, and war at the moment is a hugely political thing. But the problem is when people go, it's either this or this. And where we have to look is the nuance. And we can explore that in our books, because you don't have to be fully war is evil, I'm a pacifist, to everyone should fight for their country. There's plenty of views in between. And Russell Brand's interesting. I've been thinking about this, but also I've got a chapter on the collective shadow, which are the things out of our individual control that appear in our societies, almost manifested as a collective. And I was thinking about, it's almost like the way we fetishize famous people and celebrity means we let them indulge in these things. Like there's the Jimmy Savile movie coming out soon, and obviously Weinstein, and this behavior that is allowed
Epstein
because...
So it's our fault. I know you're saying.
Well, I think the collective shadow is fascinating because it really is this sort of manifestation. But the message of the book is you can't say, well, I'm just going to blame my society. It's about self-development. This is a self-help book. It's like, look, you start with yourself. You start by examining your own behavior. So where do I judge people? This is a big question. Who do I judge? And when you feel that judgment, where does that come from? Because judgment is a very human thing. But for example, I was at Thriller Fest. I know you've been to Thriller Fest. And I remember one of the very pro-gun lobby sharing his opinion with me. And with the way he was dressed and his accent, I judged him based on a whole load of things. And I found out a lot about him later, where I thought, do you know what? I judged that guy really wrongly based on some polarizing things. But then I got to know him. And I feel like that's also important, is that we seek nuance in ourselves, in our characters.
There's arguably less nuance in public discourse now than there ever has been in history, thanks to social media and so on. And that's it's one of the great losses, I think, from the public discourse about politics, is that entrenched. It's probably even more polarized in the States than it is in the UK, but it is not far off. It's not a happy place to be.
I want us to address that in the indie community. Obviously, I've had a lot of hate around AI stuff. A lot of people I know are getting a lot of hate around it in the same way that I got a ton of hate back in the day around self-publishing. And in the same way you see kind of militant indies having a go at authors who choose to traditionally publish. We need to stop being so polarized in all of these issues and consider the nuance. And I think if that's the message I can get across with this, and also
that would be successful.
Exactly. Becoming a better person, a better writer. These are all the things we want to be, right?
Do we have a need to be tribal? Is that what this is? We like our tribes and we become entrenched?
Oh, that's never going to change.
No.
That is never going to change. But I think the point is to be interested, to be curious.
Yes.
I feel this way. Why do I feel this way?
And empathetic. You're chatting to that guy, and I this is a brilliant thing, and a brilliant thing in life is when you're talking to somebody, even if you're saying everything that triggers you. The very best thing you can do for you and your understanding is to put yourself in their shoes for 5 minutes. So why does life look like that to them? So they're saying I'm a communist and you're evil for using money and you're shallow. They're saying all these things. You should be thinking, what does life look like? How did you get to this point? Because that's a much better way and kinder way. Well, forget kindness. It is kind, but that's irrelevant here. What's relevant is it will get you to a better position of talking to them and understanding it. But that's almost part of nuance, isn't it? Empathy seems to be ebbing away as well at the moment. Yeah,
I would definitely say being more curious about why we feel certain ways is probably what it comes down to. But at the end of the day, this is a writing show. We're writers.
Yes.
We're business people. And this is at heart about craft. It's about money. It's about business. I'm still interested in becoming a better writer and making more money as a creative. I'm releasing this on Kickstarter in between the 9th of October and the 25th of October, 2023. It's called Writing the Shadow. People can find that at thecreativepenn.com/shadow book. And then that will redirect to wherever else it's sold after that. Since we're on video, I have to show you can you see the...
That's fantastic. Yeah, I saw it earlier. You sent me the grab. It is brilliant.
And there's a ribbon. So this is going to be my first gold foil book.
Is this a book vault special?
This is a Book Vault special, yeah. So only the Kickstarter will have the gold foil, but I'm pretty excited about that. So this is another thing for my sort of future is beautiful books, beautiful physical products is what I want to move into. I'll still do all the digital stuff, but I want to make beautiful products.
Yes, aesthetically beautiful. Yeah,
yeah, lots to think about. But I hope people will find the book useful.
Well, I found a brilliant conversation, Jo, as ever. With we talked for nearly an hour about this.
Yes.
Yeah, it's flown past, but and I think I think I'm now very curious about this book.
Jolly good.
So hopefully that's the way this has come over to people, and they've heard a lot of stuff from us.
Well, thanks so much for having me, James.
You're welcome. Just a quick reminder, in case I forget when I'm back annoying this with Mark, of the link where people can get to the Kickstarter and afterwards get to where it's for sale.
Yeah, so it's thecreativepen.com/shadowbook.
Perfect. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Here you go. If you've got, are you in touch with your inner shadow, Mark? What is your inner shadow?
I don't.
What is it?
Goodness, no. I don't know. That's an interesting question.
I don't know if you'd done the interview, whether you would have talked about your past and your inner demons as much as I did in that interview, but it was quite an interesting. It was a therapy session for me.
Oh my God, I haven't heard this. I better listen. Sounds interesting.
It's revealing.
Yeah, I know Jo's been working on this book for years, so it's she's and doing really well with the last Kickstarter she ran was a big success and quite funny. I remember she told me she was worried she wouldn't hit her kind of very modest goal, and she did that within about 5 minutes. So I don't have any doubt that she'll smash this one as well. So we look forward to. Probably might be one I listen to rather than read. So I'll look forward to her getting that audiobook out.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, right. I think that's it. Just a reminder that you can buy tickets to the Self-Publishing Show 2024 in London from the 17th of October at 4 p.m. UK, which is 11 a.m. in New York and 8 a.m. in Los Angeles. If you go to selfpublishingformula.com/SPS live, can't wait to see you there. That's it from me. Thank you to the team in the background who helped put this together. And thank you, Mark, and to our guest this week, Jo Penn. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishing show. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.